Hello and welcome everybody to the How to Land Your First Job Q&A, brought to you by the Experiential Learning Hub at the University of Guelph and Julie Gelfand, the Kinross Chair of Environmental Governance here at the University of Guelph. My name is Karolina Crane and I'm a career advisor working out of the Experiential Learning Hub. If you're a student thinking about internships, your first full-time role, or how to navigate the job market with confidence, you're in the right place today. Julie is the Kinross Chair, and the Kinross Chair is a role at the University of Guelph that acts as a portal for knowledge and information exchange, connecting scholarly focus at the U of G with real-world environmental governance initiatives, programs, and practice. She has spent more than 35 years working across government, NGOs, academia, and the private sector, including serving as Canada's Federal Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development. She's also a seasoned executive coach who has helped professionals find clarity, build confidence, and thrive in their careers, and has even supported students here at the University of Guelph during her time here. She's here with me today to share practical, honest, and empowering advice for university students on landing a job, and we're with particular focus on tapping into the hidden job market and building meaningful networks. So whether you're exploring sustainability, governance, or any field at all, her insights are going to help you navigate the job search with purpose and strategy. So let's dive in. Thank you for being here today, Julie, first of all.
You're welcome.
My
I'm
first
excited.
question is, in your role here, thank you so much. I'm excited also. So in your role here at the Kinross, as the Kinross Chair, you've been connecting with students, as I mentioned, regularly and being asked all kinds of questions about career planning and job search. What are some of the most common themes that you're noticing and questions you're being asked, and how have you been responding?
Yeah. So I would say generally people are trying to figure out essentially what we're going to talk about, which is what do I do after I graduate? How do I find that first real job? And I have been responding, saying almost the same thing over and over again, which is why I'm so pleased to be doing this podcast, because I can say it once and then they can learn. So the way I've been responding is to get the students to think about their job search as, first of all, as a project, like a fourth year, third year university project. So this is going to take a few months. Pretend you have a semester to do this. And the thesis, the thing you're trying to figure out in these 3 or 4 months is, where do you want to give your energy? To whom do you want to give your energy for the next 1 to 5 years? So rather than thinking about this as I am job hunting, think about the job hunt as I am trying to figure out which organization I want to give my energy to. Do I want to give it to a government agency? Do I want to give it to a university? Do I want to give it to an NGO, a non-government organization? Do I want to give it to a corporation? Where do I want to give my energy? So if you ask somebody to say, okay, you've got 3 or 4 months to figure this out, and at the end of it, you kind of have to write a paper. Think about it as if you had to write a paper. So the methodology that I encourage the students to use includes things like self-reflection, figuring out who they are, what their skills are, and most importantly, what their transferable skills are, and to think about where, to do some research themselves about the different sectors that they could work in. So that's sort of part 1, self-reflection, part 1. Part 2, actually do a bit of research yourself, like online, and learn about the cultures. What's it like to work in government? And the most important part is to start developing a network, because the hidden job market exists, and we could debate what percentage of jobs are hidden, but there are somewhere from, let's say, 40 to 60% of the jobs that are not advertised. So the only way that they're going to find these jobs is actually by talking to people. So the main research methodology that you're going to use for this paper is a series of interviews. You're going to do self-reflection. You might do a bit of research, but really what you're going to do is talk to people. And when you talk to people, you're going to be inquisitive and curious. You're going to ask them about their career path. How did they get there? Where did they start? How did they get there? You might ask them about obstacles that they encountered, successes that they've had, what's the culture like in the organization that they're working in, what do they actually do on a day-to-day basis. All of these questions are what you would call an informational interview, a career informational interview. And I'm sure there's tips on how to do that you have, Karolina, in your group. So I'm basically getting students to start doing these interviews, not for the purpose of getting a job from that person, but with the purpose of getting that person to be part of your network. So what I want the students to do is contact somebody, anybody. It could be their mom's friend that works in their area. You could go to, for your first person, you could go to your professor and say, do you know somebody who works in this field that I could speak to? So you need to find person number one that you do this with, and you figure out how to do that. Your professors are a great resource for this. You start with the one person and you ask them for 20 minutes of their time. In the old days, we would have asked them for a meeting over coffee, but now we can do this online. So the thing that students have to understand is that people are really helpful to young people. And people are totally comfortable talking about themselves. If I ask you, Karolina, about yourself, it's easy to talk about yourself. So this isn't difficult for people to say yes to. Most people will say yes, that they will give a student 20 minutes of their time to talk about their careers. It's easy for them to do it, and most people will say yes. The student will then interview that person, ask all these questions. Towards the very end of the interview, that's when I get the student to try to get two things out of that talk. One is to get that person to potentially link them with 1 to 3 other people. Usually I ask for 3 introductions. So I'm talking to John, and I've had this really interesting conversation with John, and John tells me a few things, and I'm like, oh, could you point me in the direction? Are there a few people that I could speak to about this? Would you introduce me? And John will probably say yes. He may say no, but he's likely to say yes. 80% chance he's going to say yes, he'll do that. So you want to get 3 more names, 3 more introductions. And then the last thing you want to do at the end of the conversation is you want to say something like, would it be okay for me to link in with you, to establish a LinkedIn presence with you? And would you be okay if I sent you my resume just in case you hear about something, because I am thinking about my future and I might be interested in working. You might hear of something that might interest me. That is the job that I want the students to do. Interview John, get John to make 3 introductions, and then get John to say yes to the LinkedIn request and get John to say yes to accepting to see my resume. From there, the student then waits for those 3 introductions, follows up with those 3 people, and does the same thing. 3 new interviews. They get 3 more names from these 3 people. Now we're up to 9 people, and they follow this through until actually they will find a job at some point. That is my best advice for strategy on how to find a job. I mentioned this to one of my colleagues, and she said, that's all great advice, Julie. Tell the students to also keep up with that network. If you get a senior person that you've spent 20 or 30 minutes chatting with and that you are interested in, that you would like to maintain a connection, I recommend to the students that every 3 to 6 months on LinkedIn Messenger, maybe, they send a little note saying, hi, I read this article, thought you might be interested, to remind them that this person is out there still. So I can't say that if you've done 50 interviews, you're going to be able to network with 50 people. That's probably too many. But out of those 50 interviews that you might do, there might be 10 people that you're interested in staying connected with. And I recommend that you do that. So just to finish off, I just want to give the students an example, a real life example. Jessica, I gave her this advice. Jessica reached out to a contact that I gave her. Her name was Vicky. She did the informational interview with Vicky, and Vicky introduced her to 3 more people. 2 weeks later, Vicky, introduction number 1, called up Jessica and said, I have some work. Would you be willing to work with me? Jessica has now worked for Vicky for over 3 years. This stuff works. When I did it 40 years ago, because it's the same process that we did 30 or 40 years ago, I went to my university professor and I said, I want to work at Parks Canada. And he said, oh, one of my grad students works there. You have to understand that I remember almost nothing. I have a terrible memory, but I still remember the name Rick Pratt. And I met with Rick Pratt from Parks Canada. And Rick said, it's lovely to meet you, Julie. Unfortunately, I don't actually have any work right now, but my colleague Marie, just over there, she has a job opening and I'll introduce you to her. And Marie hired me. So person number 2 hired me. This is the way you're going to find your first job, in my opinion. You still have to apply online when you see jobs. Absolutely, you have to do that. But when you're looking for work, think about your extended network, start interviewing people, keep track of all the people that you've interviewed and all the learnings. What was it like when you phoned the Niagara Commission? What was it like when you talked to somebody at the government of Ontario? What was it like when you called somebody who worked in a consulting company? Write all that stuff down because that's going to help you pick as well which company. You might get more than one offer of work. But if I were to give any advice to people, this is the best advice I can give about how to look for work.
I love it. Thank you so much. There's so much I want to comment about, and for sake of time, I can't say most of the things. But what I do want to say is that from my experience as a career advisor, for sure, we share very similar insights and advice. And part of the struggle, I think, is, but what am I going to say? How am I going to say it? How am I going to find these people, or make a good impression in that first introduction or first time I reach out on LinkedIn to ask them for that connection. And so I want anyone listening here today to know that we've worked hard in the EL Hub to actually develop resources and scripts and tip sheets that can support you through the nitty-gritty pieces there. But 100%, I mean, personally in my career, I did the same thing. And it was also connection number 2 or 3 that landed me a volunteer role, that led me to get more interviews, that led me to get eventually my first job. And it really is the power of connection. There's a famous, I don't know how famous it is, but it was a quote that I've put in some of my slideshows that said the best way to stand out in a stack of resumes is to never be put in the stack in the first place, which essentially goes back to this whole networking piece. And I think it sounds quite overwhelming, right, to a lot of students to hear this advice and imagine themselves doing it. But all they have to do often is try it once, and they really feel the power of that connection making, right?
So you're absolutely right. And one of your colleagues came to one of my classes and talked about this sort of fear of doing this. And I thought it was fascinating. So there's a couple things to remember. When somebody calls me up and asks me, this is not difficult for me. It's not like they're putting me through a difficult test. I know myself and I know my life and I know my history and I know my career. This is easy. These are easy questions for me to answer. For the student, this is a new skill. So if you were learning how to play basketball, the first time you go on the court, you're probably not very good. And it's going to take you a little while to get better because you're going to have to practice. And similarly, this skill of reaching out to people and talking to people is like any other muscle that you have to just try. And your first one may be terrible. It probably won't be, but it might be. And you try it a second time, you might get a little bit better and better and better. And the other thing your colleague said was, it feels scary to talk to somebody that you don't know. And it might, but she said your brain she was talking about safety. You're not unsafe when you call up Julie and ask her a few questions. You might be uncomfortable, just like you'd be uncomfortable on that basketball court if you've never played basketball, but you're not unsafe. You're just uncomfortable. And the second and third time you go on the basketball court, you feel less uncomfortable. So remember that as well, as it would be advice I would give to the students. It might be uncomfortable at the beginning, and the first time you do it, maybe you do it with your friend, your parent's friend, to try it the first time. Or maybe you interview a colleague the first time so that you start to get a bit more comfortable, but you're not unsafe. So it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's
Yeah.
not okay to be unsafe. And you're not putting yourself in an unsafe position. And I thought that was great advice. So, really, all you have to do is find one person to start with and interview that person. And maybe you get to three, but I have never met anybody that's gone past the third or fourth level of people. They have almost all found work. It may not be full time, it may not be permanent, it might be a small contract, but it's usually a professional gig. It's your first professional job and it opens doors for other ones. So yeah, I really believe in the methodology. You're proof of another one where it works.
Yeah. It's all about the stepping stones.
Yes.
On that note of interviewing people and asking good questions and finding out more information about careers and companies, is there a favorite question you've heard somebody use or even ask you that was really well worded and provided some exceptional insight?
Well, one person just asked me just before this interview, she said, "What was your favorite aspect of all your work?" And nobody had ever asked me that. Like, what was the favorite part of everything I did? I was like,
You've
nobody's
done a
asked me
lot.
that. Yeah, that was great. Really, the questions are pretty simple, Carolina. I would say if I were interviewing you, Carolina, can you tell me, your career path? Like, how did you get started and to get to where you are? I might ask you, what's it like where you work now? And what was it like in the other places that you worked in terms of culture? I would ask you, were there any things that you really disliked in some of those places or what the difference was in different places? There's not very many questions that you have to ask. As you just saw, Carolina, you asked me a question and I went on and on and on. And that is what happens when you ask somebody, talk to me about your career path. They will go on and on and on. It's not hard for them to talk quite a bit. So take notes, be curious, listen to what they're saying because they may say something that twigs your curiosity and you want to know more. But the questions are not that complicated. You're really just trying to find out about the person. And if there's something interesting that they say, you might want to dig a little bit deeper, but you're really just reaching out to them, to talk to them, to find out what it was like to work where they're working or where they have worked, and to decide for yourself, do I want to work in that environment or not? Because maybe you don't. Maybe you hear it and you go, my God, I don't ever want to work in that environment, right? Well, that's a learning for you. And hopefully that's in your spreadsheet because remember, you got to write a paper at the end, which is where do I want to spend my next 1 to 5 years and who do I want to give my energy to? And so you're going to be learning. You're doing research. You're actually doing real research to try to figure it out.
That's right. And university students are quite good at that as well.
Exactly.
And I love
Exactly.
the idea of taking notes. It's something that I bring up a lot when I talk about this informational interviewing piece with students. I say, like, even write down the most random things that are said. You never know when that can come in handy. For example, someone mentions that they couldn't find a decent coffee spot on campus. Here's an excuse later to when you do that outreach and trying to figure out how to maintain that connection, to reach out and say, by the way, this great new place just opened up, perhaps close to campus. Check that out next time. Thanks again for meeting with me. It's those little touch points that make you a human being and a memorable human being. So I love that you're also promoting that piece around the research paper and the note taking for sure.
I would say that it helps you relax in the interview because you're not
For
looking
sure.
for a job. You're actually trying to figure out, do I want to work where this person works? Maybe I don't. And so you're doing research as opposed to, I need a job. You know what I mean? You're like, I'm checking you out. Like, I'm checking out this organization. Do I want to work there or not? It's a very different headspace. And you're more relaxed as the interviewer because you're not after a job from this person. You're after information about what it's like to work there. And just at the very end, you just happen to say, hey, I'm continuing this research. I'm trying to figure out where I want to go. If you hear of anything, here's my CV just in case, right? It really
Yeah.
works.
And on that note, I think that one of the concerns that students sometimes have is just trying to make that good first impression. And you, having been a national public figure and spokesperson yourself, what advice would you give to students on communicating confidently especially when they feel like they're not really experts in their field yet, and maybe they don't feel like they have much to offer yet.
Yeah. What can I say about that? It's okay to say that you're not an expert. I mean, if a student approaches me, I know that they're just a student. They're students. They're young, and I'm not expecting them to be full of all the answers. I'm expecting them to be curious and wanting to learn. That's what I'm expecting of them. And that's what all my pals would be expecting of them as well. So what can I say? I hope that they are confident because they've done some self-reflection, that they have figured out their own set of transferable skills. You were a bartender. Tell me what the transferable skills were of being a bartender. There are many. You were a camp counselor. Know what the transferable skills are of being a camp counselor. Again, there are many. So make sure you know before you go and talk to people a little bit about who you are. And it's okay to not be everything. None of us are. What I usually describe for most people is the bell curve. We all know the bell curve. And most of us can function pretty well, do almost everything in the middle, right? We know how to do our laundry. We know how to write. We know how to, we can kind of function. And on the edges, we have a couple of skills that we know are kind of better than most people. It could be athletic skills. It could be, in my case, I have a lot of energy. I smile. I'm enthusiastic. That's kind of my superpower, right? On the other side of that bell curve are a couple things that I'm really not that good at. And that's okay, because there are a couple things that most of us are really not that good at. I personally can't stand going through piles of information and coming up with, the position statement. I'm not good at it. I don't like it. I could do it if I had to. I'm not great at it. There are people who are much better at it. That's okay. I tell people that. The more you're self-aware, the more impressive in a way you are to people, because they'll say, that person's not going to lie to me. They're actually upfront with what they're not good at. So for the most part, we're good at almost everything. Like, we can function. We're slightly better at some things, slightly worse at other things. On the end of the bell curve, we're really good at a couple things that outshine other people. And there's a couple things that we're really not very good at. And it's okay. And it's good to know what those are.
That's right. Yeah. To go a little bit beyond some of that and continue that, I talk to students around, it's okay to be honest. Like, you're human, you're talking to another human who has been in a similar situation, has also needed help once upon a time, also didn't know everything. So you don't have to be perfect, perfectly
No,
professional, even as long as you are there and willing to learn. And I love your comments around knowing yourself and doing some self-reflection first and recognizing those transferable skills, because that's really helpful, and really impressive when a young person is able to say, oh, well, when I worked at McDonald's,
yeah,
when I was able to set the schedule, that was actually a demonstration of my organization skills, attention to detail,
exactly.
ability to work in a team. And so I think that would be helpful in a place like this, right? And there's a lot of young people that I find that aren't able to recognize or appreciate that. And they'll say, well, I've only worked at McDonald's. That doesn't count for anything.
That's not true.
Yeah, know yourself for sure.
Yeah. What I encourage people to do actually is to try to come up myself with the transferable skills. So I worked at McDonald's. Okay, what did I actually have to deal with? Irate customers, scheduling, some of the math, maybe. Who knows? Like, all the different things. And what are the actual skills that I developed? Then I encourage students to Google it and say, what are the transferable skills of? And in fact, I was mentoring an artist, and I was like, "Ooh, I wonder what the transferable skills of an artist are." And there was a list that was that long. It was huge. They are able to take criticism. They have great attention to detail, like beyond most people. They really understand color. That's stuff that I am terrible at. You know what I mean? So those are skills that are transferable from being an athlete. You have skills that are transferable. It doesn't matter what you've done. You've developed skills that are transferable. And I could just give you my example. When I got my first job, remember I was talking about Rick Pratt telling me about, her name was Marie. and it was a policy development job that I was applying for. And I was like, okay, just graduating university, policy development. So I thought to myself, well, what is policy? Policy is basically a set of rules, right? Like, this is what we're
That's
going to
right.
do if, right? So I thought, okay, well, I was the head of the biology society. I came up with a few rules about how we were going to operate. Not very many, but a few. And I thought, well, that's policy development. And I therefore have a transferable skill. Now I'm
That's right.
at Parks Canada. I'm in a much more complex environment. I have to do a lot more research before I come up with the policy, but I'm still coming up with a bunch of rules for how recreational vehicles are going to operate in a national park. It is the same thing as the rules that I set up for my little biology society of 20 people, and it worked. The skills are transferable,
Mhm.
and knowing what those are and feeling good, okay, I have a few transferable skills that will work in different settings, and the rest I can learn.
That's fantastic. It's that whole another saying, right? Believe you have to believe in yourself or nobody else will believe in you either, right? And you have to sell what you've got. So I think that's really in line with that piece of, we do have a lot of amazing skills and we need to just sell
Yeah.
what we've got.
Yeah.
Something
And
that I repeat.
we can operate in that part of the bell curve. And then we have a couple things that are remarkable about us, right? And I've had to ask myself, what's remarkable about me? And most people have said, Julie, you're smiling all the time. I was like, well, okay. Most people have said to me, you are enthusiastic beyond imagine. I'm like, okay, that's my little superpower, right?
I
That's what makes
definitely agree.
so that's what makes me like I'm not the brainiac. I surround myself with people who have skills that I do not have, and that is important if you ever become a leader. If you ever become a leader, then make sure that you surround yourself with people who are different than you, not a bunch of yous. You need a bunch. So that's a whole other conversation. But when you become a leader, really surround yourself with people who are not like you and who have skills and who have those superpower skills that are different than yours. That is great advice for the
That is
future.
great advice. Actually, my next question sort of can go off of that a little bit. So, your career has included so many major transitions. What advice can you share for students who may need to pivot early in their careers or take those unexpected opportunities? And part two of that is if you have any insight into even any industries you think that students should be paying more attention to as they job search.
So the first question is, I would say, be open. Be open to new experiences. So don't have predetermined, like you've already determined, oh, I don't want to go into consulting. Like, how do you know until you actually try it? So I went into government, into Parks Canada, because I loved what Parks Canada did. After 3 or 4 years, I was like, I can't stay here any longer because for me was too the bureaucracy was too much for me at that stage of my life. So I moved into a new sector to see if I would be better suited to that sector. And I was. And that was in the non-government NGO charitable sector, where the jobs are from soup to nuts. There's a lot less bureaucracy, and I thrived there. And then when I knew my time had come, I was open to almost anything. And I was mostly approached by somebody in the mining sector in that case. And I was like, they were working on sustainability. I was interested in sustainability. I made sure it wasn't greenwashing. And I talked to a few friends and then I went in. I knew nothing about mining. I mean, I knew this much about mining. In fact, I had started an organization that was kind of anti-mining. And then I went to work for the mining sector. So I then actually then worked for a corporation, a mining company. Imagine I had been spending my whole life trying to protect nature. And all of a sudden I was working for this mining company, which is digging a big hole in the ground, making
Right.
kind of a mess. But we need the stuff that comes out of the ground. So how do we do it in the best way possible? And I did that for a few years. And then I went back and went into government. But I also applied for a whole pile of jobs. I think applying for jobs and networking is something you should be doing your whole life. You don't want to be in a career for 10 or 15 years and have never interviewed in 10 or 15 years because you're going to feel rusty and uncomfortable again. So I think people should be constantly kind of looking and maybe interview once a year for a job and continuously keep that muscle pumping so that when you do want to go, you are not as frightened about it. So that's what I kind of did. Not all the time. You don't follow your own advice all the time. When I was working in the charity, I was super happy there and I wasn't going to leave and I didn't need to. But I'm a comfortable job hunter. Like I'm not uncomfortable.
Hmm.
But if you're uncomfortable, I recommend that you keep the skill up because
Yeah.
it's daunting 10 years later to go, oh my God, I haven't interviewed in 10 years, right? For
Yeah,
some
for
people, that's
sure.
very daunting.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. And just being open to trying new things and being willing to explore and see where it can take you.
And nothing is
And
permanent because if you don't
no,
like it, you can change. You and you're most appealing to other employers when you already have a job,
that's
right?
right.
So if you have a job that you don't quite like, stay there as you look for another job. You know what I mean? And then go once you find something that you like better. And the grass can seem greener on the other side, and it may not be. So, do your research.
That's right. And there's always transferable skills being built at every single experience, like we talked about, right? So being willing to see that and recognize that goes a really long way, regardless of what the job title is that we take on next.
Exactly.
Just part two of the question was, are there any industries that you wish or hope that more youth, young people, students would pay more attention to when they're thinking about their job search and if they are open to a pivot? What would you recommend they pivot to potentially?
So you would be surprised at how many industries these days are talking about how they're going to have a dearth of people, which does not seem to jive with the feeling that we have about the job market being really bad. But if you talk to the folks, for example, in the mining sector, which is a sector I know a little bit, they're talking about needing 55,000 people in the next few years. Yeah, exactly. The construction industry, the nuclear sector is growing. Everything related to the critical minerals and building things these days,
Right.
as Canada worries about its sovereignty. So I would think about any industries where you see governments supporting those industries. You think about those industries. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have like a crystal ball for sure, but definitely the marine shipping is another one. I just happen to know a little bit about these, and almost all of them are going to have a pile of people who are retiring soon, and they're going to need people in all aspects.
All right. So that brings us to the end of today's conversation. Julie, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your honesty and your practical words of wisdom with everybody. Your insights are exactly the kind of guidance that students need as they're stepping into the job market, especially today with things being so unpredictable. For everyone listening, remember that career paths are rarely straight lines, and it's really important to just stay curious and be open to opportunities, not be to take steps before you feel ready and talk to people, as Julie made so clear today. Make connections, keep building them, stay informed. And if you'd like more support with your job search or career planning, the Experiential Learning Hub and our team of career advisors are here to support you. Thank you for joining us today and see you all next time.